The nuts, bolts, and screws of blacksmithing are a much overlooked part of the process. After you've made hardware, hooks, any other number of other things that need to hang up somewhere or be assembled in some way, there has to be other hardware that does that. And while there are numerous things available commercially, you can buy just about any size nut, bolt, or screw you need, but they don't look good with blacksmithing. This is the hinge that we just made in our last couple of videos. Which looks better to you? That bright shiny silver dot on the hinge, there's a modern hex head bolt, or a nice square-headed lag bolt. Personally, I like the square-headed lag bolt better. The problem is, where do you find square-headed lag bolts or any of this other stuff in black finish that looks good with the ironwork? The good news is that unplated square head lag bolts and sometimes machine bolts and square nuts are still available out there in limited quantities from some specialized suppliers. They're getting harder to find all the time, and you can't guarantee you'll get exactly what you want. But places like Blacksmith Bolt, Kane & Sons Blacksmiths Depot, and Pay Tool, I know, sell some assortment of square-headed lag bolts. And they're unplated. You can blacken those up in the forge and they're ready to go. And it's a great option, but sometimes more expensive and sometimes very limited quantities or sizes. And you can't always get what you want. You can get almost anything in zinc plated, from 1/4 inch lag bolts an inch long to 5/8 or 3/4 inch lag bolts 12 or 14 inches long. I don't even know what the limit is there. You can get flat-headed wood screws. You can get nuts, you can get bolts, you can get wing nuts. You need an eye screw for a project, but don't want to try and file the threads into a ring you make. It's a lot of work to file that for a part that only costs you 50 cents or less. So what do? Well, the answer is we need to take the plating off of these. Zinc plating is toxic when you put it in the forge, and you don't want to do any forging or any other work on these with the zinc plating on. Yes, it will burn off, but the smoke that comes off of that is nasty, and I know of at least one case where somebody has died breathing the smoke from the zinc plated fasteners. They refer to it as metal fume fever, and it's a real problem. Welders have an issue with it, and blacksmiths can certainly have an issue. So the trick is to get the plating off first, and it's really quite simple to do. I start with my high-tech kitchen accessory here and put all the fasteners that I want to strip the plating off of in this kitchen colander. And it should be a plastic one. A metal one isn't real good for this. And all that stuff just goes right in there. I don't think I'm going to worry about that because it's so big. And the rest of this stuff is already black. It's not zinc plated, so I don't have to worry. Oh, there's one more. There we go. We'll do all those. Outside the shop, I keep a plastic bucket with a weak acid solution. And into this bucket, I set the colander and let it hang. It's that simple. Well, this is a fairly weak hydrochloric acid solution, similar to muriatic acid you'd buy at the home center. I still want to keep it outside where it's not going to put any of my equipment at risk or be at much risk of spilling. If I had children around, I would have this locked up so that nobody could accidentally dump it over. But you can see it actually corrodes the metal siding there, so I need to move it to somewhere else. You can also do this in white vinegar. White vinegar probably takes longer. When this was a stronger solution, these things would soak for perhaps 15 minutes and be ready to use. Right now this is about a 2-hour soak, but I can go do anything else I feel like doing while they soak. White vinegar is probably 24 hours to soak the parts off, but much easier to come by, much safer, and not a disposal problem. So we've let our bolt soak in the acid for a couple of hours. Just a few more words on the acid. Like I said, this started off as a very strong hydrochloric acid solution. I got the jugs of whatever it was, whatever strength, ages ago from a knife maker that was moving and didn't want to take gallon jars of acid with him. I've used all that up. This is just whatever's left in the bucket, and it gets weaker and weaker and weaker. The strong acid would strip the zinc plating off in 10 or 15 minutes, but if you left the bolts in there too long, it would actually start eating away the bolts. And that's not a good thing. This weaker acid now takes about 2 hours, but it's much safer to work around. I'm not as concerned at all about splashing. I've had a few little dribbles hit my hand, and it doesn't burn as long as you rinse it off right away. Nevertheless, I would recommend wearing rubber gloves, face shield, and rubber apron. Wear proper safety equipment working around acid. White vinegar would be even safer to work around, but would take much longer, probably overnight or full 24 hours perhaps. But if you leave the stuff in white vinegar and forget about it, because you put it in there Friday afternoon and then you took a long weekend and came back to it on Monday, it's probably going to be fine. You're not going to eat the bolts up doing that. So when this reaches at the end of its life and I can't get any use out of it, I'm just going to go to white vinegar. It'll be safer to have around. It's easier to come by and buy it at the grocery store. Easier to dispose of when you're done with it. Probably a much better option. You just have to think ahead 24 hours before you need a bolt or a screw. So I've got all these in the low colander. After taking them out of the acid, I've rinsed them several times in clean water. In a stronger acid solution, I used to rinse them in a baking soda solution to make sure I neutralize the acid. I don't feel that's as necessary. Dropped one of them on the dirt floor, it's gone forever. Don't feel that's as necessary with the weaker acid, and certainly don't feel it's vital for vinegar solution. Rinsing several times in clean water gets rid of it. So I don't need the colander anymore. Now, you can call this good and just leave these bolts the way they are and run them through the fire to darken them up and make them match your work. They're going to rust if you leave them like this, and we're going to treat those so they don't rust so easily. But I don't like the hex heads, especially not the factory hex heads. I like to do a little bit more with them. So I'm going to take the hex head bolts, the lag bolts, lag screws, and set them aside. Now the hex head nut, I don't think there's anything you can do to make that look any better other than darken it. And the carriage bolts, there's not much you can do to that. But all this stuff isn't going to get reforged. It's just going to get treated to color match. So I'm going to set them aside. I'm going to put them in my old nasty coal shovel here. And I'll tell you why that shovel's so nasty in a minute. And we're going to do something to the smaller ones of these. I don't need to deal with that big bolt right now. And we're going to make them look a little bit better, I hope. Now I'm still working in the coal forge today just because I don't like it. The coal forge has a real disadvantage on little pieces like this, that it is super easy to lose them. And it's even worse in a charcoal fire. So this is someplace where the gas forge and even a little mini gas forge really shine. That makes so much better a way to work. You put a dozen of these in the fire, not worry about burning them up, and you don't have to worry about losing them. If you're careful though, you can avoid losing these in the fire. They don't need to be at any blistering high heat. And for a square head bolt, I just square up the hex head, I put it in a heading plate, flatten it a little bit to make sure it's even, and I do 4 quick little bevels. And I think that looks so much better than a hex head bolt, and 1,000,000 times better than a zinc plated hex head bolt in forged ironwork. Okay, quickly square it up. Now you can do a lot of other things with this. You can use a chisel and chase little decorations into them. It's really just up to you. The big disadvantage to these square heads is, one, they're not perfectly square, but two, that doesn't fit any standard size wrench in most cases, and it may not fit the same wrench in both dimensions. So you pretty much have to put these in with an adjustable wrench. That doesn't really bother me, but it might bother some customers. Those times when it really matters, we can just leave the hex head and just put a little light bevel, and it looks better, and it's still going to fit a standard socket or a standard wrench, as long as you don't flatten it out too much doing that. Do the same thing. My heading plate has spaces here for 1/4, 5/16, and 3/8 bolts. I have other heading tools for larger bolts. So you get the idea there where we're going. If these are still hot when you're done, it's a simple matter to put a little bit of wax on them. You can use beeswax, you can use a linseed oil mix. I like Johnson's paste wax for no particular reason other than it's super convenient, and it does a pretty good job. So there's a nice waxed black bolt, matches the hinges exactly because I use the same wax treatment on my hinges. If you're having things powder coated, you can leave the wax off and have the bolts powder coated or painted. For the things that I'm not going to forge, like washers, hex head nuts, the little eye screw, wood screws, I just put those things in my little coal shovel here and bring the whole mess up to a dull red heat. The shovel gets a lot hotter than the other pieces. Again, this is something that is vastly easier to do in a gas forge. So if I'm processing nuts, bolts, washers, I try to do them in fairly large quantities. I do them in the gas forge, and it goes a lot faster. You don't have to lose things. And these heat up faster. These would already be done heating in a gas forge because the flame would be coming down from the top instead of trying to heat that shovel up first. But you just want a dull red in the hardware. You're not looking at the color of the shovel. That's not starting to glow yet. Just a little bit more. When I do wood screws, I do hundreds. All they get is the acid treatment and then brought up to a dull red heat, allowed to cool some, and then waxed. So I do wood screws for hinges and things like that, 200 or 300 at a time. So I've let these cool some. They're still way too hot to touch. And the idea is when I put a little bit of this paste wax in, which is down to little lumps in the bottom of it, they should smoke some. And if I've let them cool too much, but they're still melting the wax down in there. I think I've let them cool too much, but I'm going to go ahead and just go with that because I think you get the idea. And what you end up with is a bunch of nice blackened pieces that match your ironwork. So that's an easy way to get nuts, bolts, screws, other hardware like this eye screw, wing nuts, whatever you might need that's available commercially but doesn't look good with the ironwork, you can make it look good with the ironwork. You can certainly make these things. You could make a handmade roundhead wood screw, I'm sure. I don't want to take the time to do that. But if you look at the commercial screw on this little hook, personally, I think that looks bad. I think the black, exact same screw, but done in black, complements the hook. I think drywall screws, even though they are black, look just like drywall screws, and I think that's an insult to your work to put it up with drywall screws. A lot of people do it, and that's just fine if that's what you want to do. But I think you and your customers ultimately will be happier with a decent screw, and slotted screws look better, in my opinion, than Phillips screws or Torx screws or anything else you might get out there, just because it's a more traditional look, and blacksmithing is a traditional activity. Now, if you need something special, you can decorate these, or you can start from scratch and make your own bolt. Maybe sometime we'll just make a bolt and a nut, just to show that that is possible to just make those yourself. You don't have to buy them. By the way, this was part of the Blacksmith's Challenge projects and was made out of that 1/2 by 1/2 by 3-inch mild steel, the entire bolt. That is a quick and simple look at a way to achieve some good looking fasteners for your work. I strongly encourage you take the few minutes it takes, even if all you're doing is leaving the factory shape on a bolt, at least making it color match your work, I think is well worth the effort. It will enhance your work greatly, whereas bright silver zinc plated bolts tend to distract from the ironwork, in my opinion. Again, it's your work, it's up to you. Do it the way you want to do it. I'm just offering advice, and it's free advice, and it's worth what you pay for it, I guess. So, thank you for watching the video. Take a moment and hit that thumbs up button if you liked it. There's a subscribe button down there. I would really appreciate it if you click on that button and subscribe to my channel. Take a moment to watch some of the other videos. There should be a link that pops up here any minute now. And in the meantime, get out to the shop, get some iron hot, get to work, stay safe, and have fun.